And so based on my own experience as an international student, I was like, there are some things that I think could be improved. And instead of just complaining all the time, why don't I just do a study? Why don't I just do something?
That was the voice of Candice Wray, the guest on this episode of The Knowledge Mill. I'm your host, Greg Yoakum. Candice Wray is a clinical psychologist who graduated with a Master of Science in Clinical Psychology from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica. She has worked with a wide array of people, including children with special needs, adolescents with behavioral challenges, and adults seeking to cope with everyday challenges. Candice is a Jamaican native who, in line with her passion of serving others and a quest for self-development, has embarked on a journey leading her to new horizons in the field of human resource management. This redirection of her career ultimately led her to Taiwan, where she is currently pursuing a PhD in human resource management at National Sun Yat-sen University. Her research interests include organizational behaviors such as workaholism, proactive work behaviors, and employee well-being. Candice and I met for the first time even as we sat down to record this episode. Her experiences as an international student are a cornerstone of her ongoing research and came to be a very interesting part of a good-humored conversation that I think you'll really enjoy. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded on December 3, 2024 on the campus of the University of Wollongong during the 37th Conference of the Australian and New Zealand Academy of Management, aka ANZM. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Candice and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 12. That's episode and the numerals 1 and 2. Hello, Candice. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're here on the ground at the 2024 ANZM conference at the University of Wollongong. It's day one of the conference, but yesterday was the doctoral workshop.
So it's day 2 for me.
Day 2 for you. How's it been going?
The doctoral workshop was pretty good. It was a full day. We were here from, I think, 7 until 5.
Wow.
So it was a pretty full day, but I really liked the session on AI. I'm not really familiar with AI because that's not my area of expertise. I'm more OB, more micro researcher. So I don't get to do a lot of AI. So I was really interested in the talk by Dr. Sharia about AI and what are the possibilities, what are some of the advantages, the challenges, and I learned all these new words like AI hallucination, and I'm like, what? AI can hallucinate? Like, what? Yeah, so far it's been pretty good.
Yeah, nice one. Well, that's an ongoing and evolving challenge, right? Is AI, because like in the classroom, for example, students are using it in potentially nefarious ways, but then as researchers as well, there's been some instances of falsified research using ChatGPT and other.
Right.
Did any of that come up in the talk? The ethics of it?
The ethics definitely came up, and he mentioned something in particular that I thought was interesting. He talked about what is it called? Robo-debt, something that happened in Australia.
Oh, okay.
Where the AI falsely generated people who owed debt.
Oh.
And so debt collectors were coming to these people, and I think there were some instances of suicide as a result.
Oh,
and
wow.
so that there's a huge commission going on right now trying to figure out what happened. And he brought up a really good point that we don't really know what's happening in the coding of these AI. So we don't know where to go to find what the mistake was. So he talked about that there's a black box and that we need to be more transparent in terms of making the coding accessible to people so that we can go through these to see where we can find the mistakes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of that story. That's wild. It's kind of like blockchain, I guess, that way, like cryptocurrencies and that kind of thing. It's not really traceable down the line, which is one of the advantages of it for a certain kind of person who might want to do dodgy things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hadn't thought about that it's sort of hard to unpack where something came from.
Right.
Even if it's open source, you don't know where the open source coding came from either.
Right.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, well, that sounds like it was really fascinating then. Have you met any other fellow doctoral researchers or?
Doctoral researchers, I did meet a few people. There are people here from all over. There are people from Edinburgh, from Germany, India. I mean, I'm from Taiwan. So we're from wide and far.
Yeah. That's one of the things that attracted me to this conference. Is this is actually the first conference of this type I've been to, and there's just so many more people from different places in different fields.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just met someone downstairs from St. Lucia.
Oh.
From the Caribbean as well.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And they've come a long way.
Yes.
That's basically the other side of the world. Wow. Well, good stuff. So today's the first day of the conference proper. Have you seen any interesting talks?
I was at a session this morning also about AI, which was pretty interesting. They were talking about the perceptions and the behaviors and attitudes of people towards AI, who is more likely to be open to it and who is likely to be resistant and things like that. And they were talking about, of course, the use of AI in higher education and how, that can be problematic and where do we draw the line? How do we manage it? So that was a pretty interesting talk. And, there are not really many answers at this point because AI is still pretty new.
Yeah. So
there's not much surety about how we're going to manage students and their use of AI. And she brought up a really good point, we can allow them to use it, but would you want the engineer who asks ChatGPT how to calculate this, or do you want them to know how to calculate this?
Yeah.
So that's that's where you draw the line. Yes, you can use it, but at what point do you say we want someone who actually knows rather than someone who is assisted?
Yeah.
So that's pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been the way for, since I'm old enough that my undergrad, I didn't even really there weren't even online resources like Canvas and those kind of things to go download your assignments. And so I even had teachers who at that time were they didn't understand the internet. And so they just told us we couldn't use internet resources.
Right.
And, that's kind of the point we're at now. We could say don't use ChatGPT et al. But how can we actually police that?
Right. It's hard to police it.
Yeah.
And, she also said that when Google was introduced, just like you said, there were people who were resistant and didn't want students to use it. But, it's unstoppable, basically. Yeah. So we just have to figure out, where's going to be the line to what or how much they can use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, our job. Do you want to be an academic when you're done with your PhD?
I want to be an academic, but I also want to be in industry. So, last year was when I learned the term pracademic.
Oh, yeah. I like that term.
And I learned it last year at ANZAM because I was there as well in New Zealand. And I learned this. And when I went to that conference, I was so confused, because I was like, okay, I like academia, but I don't want to necessarily be in academia 100% of the time. I still want some industry experience. And I was like, so what do I do? How do I do that? And then I came to the conference and they were like, pracademic. I was like, yes, that's it. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So I hope to find a school or a university that will, give me the flexibility to also work in industry as well.
I think that those kind of jobs are going to be increasing. For different reasons. One is I think that's the future for higher education, because that's kind of what I was getting at with my question is, do you want to find yourself teaching and preparing students for the future? And it sounds like that is part of what you want to do.
Right.
But that's where, education has become commodified, that you go and you pay your money and you get your passing marks and you get your diploma, and then the expectation is you'll get a certain kind of job and a certain kind of salary. But it should be more than that, in my view. That
How so? In what way?
To prepare people to participate in a democratic society. And I think that as universities, our job is to anticipate the future, where our students will be working and making their careers, possibly inventing their jobs, like I think it sounds like you might be doing one day. And if we give them that skill set, that's the best we could do to prepare them. And that, I think, is about a more liberal, and I mean liberal in the sense of liberal arts rather than liberal politics, a liberal arts education, a well-rounded education that inspires critical thought and enables critical thought. Because I think a lot of our students are going to end up working jobs that don't exist yet.
I think so too, because I mean, even with AI, I'm sorry to be going back to AI, but even with that, it's going to create new opportunities, new jobs. So there are things that we haven't even thought of that will come up in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different problems too that will come up that need a different way to solve.
And like you said with Google obviously didn't go anywhere. And so what would have been most useful is to learn how to properly use it. And so if we equip our students, here's how to actively and properly engage with this technology with a critical mind so that you're not just taking whatever it spits out as fact, then we're setting them up, I think.
I agree with that.
Okay, well, that sort of gives us a nice little segue because I want to hear more about how you see yourself as a pracademic. So could you tell us a little bit about how you found yourself doing a PhD and what kind of work you're doing?
Okay. Let's see. I think I always knew that I wanted to do higher education. So even when I was in my undergrad, I always knew that I wanted to go all the way. But I did start my undergrad in psychology. And I did a bachelor's in psychology, and the natural progression from that was to go and do a master's. So I went and did a master's in clinical psychology, and the natural progression for that would have also been to go do a PhD in psychology as well. And I was in the process of searching for a PhD program in psychology, and I did apply to PhD programs in psychology, and I was accepted to a university in the UK, but it was quite expensive, even with a scholarship that they were offering. And in the midst of doing this search, I also found this PhD program in Taiwan. And I always tell people it was just such a happy coincidence. I just saw it. I didn't go looking for it. And I was like, oh, and I started to read up on what they were offering. And I just decided to apply. I really didn't even think I would get accepted, to be honest.
Right.
And when I got the email that said I was accepted, it was like unbelievable. And then my mom was like, "You're gonna go halfway, like literally halfway across the world to leave your family and leave everything you know. And if something happens to you, it takes us like a whole 3 days to get there." And she was really worried, and I'm like, yes, I'm gonna do this. And even though my parents were worried, they were very supportive. Yeah.
No, that's excellent. And that is a happy day because you don't want to get your hopes up. But then it comes through. Yes, happy days.
It really was. And they were offering an amazing scholarship. I think Taiwan has really amazing scholarships. Yeah.
It really does vary country to country.
Yeah, it does.
Like Australia, I think, is one of the good examples. If you're doing doctoral research, you can get some scholarship money and support that way. And I think that's key. It's very hard to do a PhD if you're not funded.
Extremely difficult, especially when you're an international student, because the prices for international students is usually way higher than for the locals. And so if you are doing a PhD, it doesn't even make sense to do it if you're not funded.
Yeah.
As an international student. And so when you're searching for programs, it's really important to look into the funding. Yeah,
absolutely.
That was a deciding factor for me. Yeah. Because as I said, I got accepted to a school in the UK and I couldn't go because of the funding. Yeah. And so Taiwan I got a fully funded scholarship, fully funded stipend, everything. So it was really good.
You can just focus 100% on your studies, and that's what you need. Yeah.
Exactly. And the scholarship lasts for a period. And so after that period, if I'm still engaging in work, then I would have to figure out how to support myself. But even then, it's not that difficult because as an international student, you still have the opportunity to work. So I can work part-time as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Because you could even do that at the uni maybe as a casual academic and keep it all in one place. That's fantastic. Well, could you tell us a little bit about how far along you are with your studies and what ideas you're swimming in?
I'm currently in my 5th year.
Oh, okay.
First semester, 5th year. Sometimes I forget that. I mean, sometimes I forget my age too, but yeah.
The pandemic doesn't count. It really compressed time. It feels like it was just 2019. So.
It does. And actually, I went to Taiwan during the pandemic in 2020. And so there were a lot of uncertainties during that time, actually. I almost didn't even make it to Taiwan because, they were one of the countries that were really strict in terms of their lockdown. So they weren't accepting visitors, but they were accepting students.
Oh, lucky.
Yeah. And so when I came, they were really strict about their quarantine and everything. We were in quarantine for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And Yeah, it was a really unbelievable time. And everything was taken care of because you didn't even have to pay for accommodations during quarantine. The government did that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they were really strict. They had everything under control. They were one of the countries with the lowest outbreaks.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was a good place to be.
It was a good place to be. Yeah, it really was. Yeah.
Nice one. You could just ride it out and not stress about that side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I finished all my coursework, but my program requires me to have 2 publications with an SSCI journal. It also requires me to complete my thesis. So that's where I'm at.
Those are 2 separate. The journal articles don't go into the thesis?
No.
Okay.
Completely separate. And so I already have 2 papers that I've written up. I've submitted them. They're both under review, so that's great. Even though that doesn't mean they'll be published, but yeah,
It's just nice to not have them on your desk. They're with someone else.
So yeah, I have those 2 under review, and I'm currently working on my thesis. So that's where I'm at.
Okay. Well, walk us through a little bit about, or what you're able to walk us through with your findings. What have you found?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the 2 papers that are currently under review. The first one is about pro-social service behaviors and how that can lead to it has dual outcomes. So being pro-social means that, you go above and beyond to do things for the customer. You try to make sure that their needs are met. If they have any complaints, you try to be as helpful as possible. But that has dual effects. It can lead to work enjoyment, and it can also lead to you feeling burnout. So I think my research basically says that yes, being pro-social is a good thing, but it can also be negative because you end up worrying. What's called affective rumination. You just think about it over and over again, wondering if you did the right thing, wondering if you're going to be punished for going outside of the rules. And it depends on if you have a manager who's going to be lenient or who's going to respect the fact that you used your initiative. So it can also cause you to feel burned out because you just think over and over again, am I going to get in trouble? Is this going to be worth it or something like that? Is the customer going to be okay? So yes, it can be both positive and negative. Yeah.
Was there a particular industry you were looking at for that?
The industry was the airline industry.
Okay.
So the airline industry is really strict because they have particular rules about the standard operating procedures. So, and customers can be a little difficult at times. I think we're seeing this more and more in the airline industry where there are so many instances where people are displeased or something that happens on the aircraft and people are being asked to leave or give up their seat or something like that. So there are a lot of things that are currently happening in the airline industry. And so even though we want the frontline workers to be pro-social and to solve these problems, there's a limit to what they can do because they're standard operating procedures and they can get into trouble if they try to please you, right? Especially if it's something that's outside of the standard procedure.
Yeah.
So even though we want them to be helpful, we still have to consider that they're not at the top of the food chain per se, and they have guidelines that they need to follow. And so if they decide to be pro-social and go outside of the scope of what is expected or what is stipulated, what are the repercussions of that? And in thinking about those repercussions, it can cause them to become burnt out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's my first job was in retail, and I started on the ground level and worked my way up into management. And I remember, I'm an introverted person anyway, but I just remember I'd have an interaction with a customer, and if I couldn't resolve their issue, I felt bad, and I would just replay that interaction in my head all night. And it can be quite stressful, just like you described.
Yeah.
And I didn't even have to worry about someone's safety. Like there wasn't any SOP like that. Yeah. So that's. I mean, even just to that point, I was just in Melbourne, and on the flight back to Sydney, they were moving people around the plane, and the goal was to distribute the weight more evenly because it wasn't a very full plane. But just the fights people were having with them. I reserved this seat. I paid extra for this seat, and they're like, "Yes, we'll reimburse you, but we have to for safety reasons." But just people didn't want to move.
So it's definitely really tough navigating that. Yeah.
Yeah.
My second research, my second research is about the international students' experience in Taiwan.
Okay. It's very meta. Is there an ethnographic element to it?
It focuses on both types of international students. When I say international students, people automatically think Westerners. But Taiwan also hosts international students from Southeast Asian countries. So they have a mix of Malaysian students, students who are from Hong Kong, Philippines, and they have the European students. And they have some Caribbean students as well. And so based on my own experience as an international student, I was like, there are some things that I think could be improved. And instead of just complaining all the time, why don't I just do a study? Why don't I just do something concrete to say, here, this is what you can do better? So I did that. And with the help of, some of my professor and my colleague, who is Taiwanese. And so basically the study focuses on both Asian and non-Asian international students. So two groups of international students. And we found, that, both groups have different challenges. And even though people might think that it's easy for Asian and international students to fit in, I actually found that it's not. It's not, because people expect them to fit in, but I think it puts added pressure on them because they don't speak Chinese.
Right.
So that's another thing. And actually a quote that sticks with me from that study is an Asian international student said, when people see you and you have an Asian face and you don't speak Chinese, they don't think it's cute. They feel annoyed.
Right. What's this person's problem?
Right. Because, you look Asian. Why don't you speak Chinese? So they have those kinds of challenges.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, the Westerners, we don't speak Chinese, but we get more grace.
Right.
So it's a little imbalanced in that way, but we also have other challenges. For example, the cultural difference. Like if you're living in the West and you go live in Asia, it's a shock. It's so different. And it can be really hard to adjust to the cultural difference.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So some of the things that came up were like, in the West, we're taught to be critical thinkers, and we're taught to challenge things and to voice our opinions, and we have open debates and stuff like that. In Taiwan or in Asia in general, it's not like that. And so that aspect of the culture is really difficult to adjust to, especially because when you're in a new environment, there are things that aren't necessarily suitable for you, and you want to be able to speak up and say, hey, I don't really like this because XYZ, and in that culture, it doesn't really allow for that.
Right. So
it then becomes, how do I adjust, or how can I make this better when I can't even say that I have a problem? So, that's some of the issues that some of the international students are having. And also another major one that came up was that Taiwan has a really intense work culture. They work a lot. And so they don't really have that much work-life balance.
Right.
So as an international student, you already don't have that social support. So then if you're surrounded by people who aren't, contributing to making that social space where you can make friends or just relax, then it makes it even tougher because you already don't have that support to begin with.
Yeah. So
those are some of the challenges that we experience as international students in Taiwan.
Right. That's tough. That's tough. Did some of your findings mirror your own experiences that way?
Definitely. You'd have thought that I didn't even interview anyone. It was just my opinion. But it was kind of comforting to see that other people shared my experience, and it wasn't just me having these issues. But my professor also challenged me to really make some solid recommendations in the practical implications part. She read my paper and she's like, oh, I read your paper, but you're talking about you're making all these complaints. What about the recommendations? How do we fix it? You need to put something for policy. So she really challenged me to do that. And, I feel pleased with it, but we'll see what the reviewers think. Yeah.
Is this the first journal then you've submitted it to? You're waiting for the feedback?
I'm waiting for the first journal, so I'm waiting. Yeah.
Stressful.
It is very stressful.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting to hear because, of course, I teach here in Australia, and we get a fair few Chinese students. The university where I teach actually has one of the highest proportions of any uni in Australia. That's about to change, actually, because they're putting through federal legislation putting a cap on international students. But we'll wait and see how that turns out. But in the classroom, it's the reverse of everything you just said, because there's a class I teach called Design Thinking for Social Innovation. And it's in a school of communications, and one of the assignments, it's 70% of their mark, actually. They're meant to keep a reflective journal through the semester. And we have a really hard time getting specifically Chinese students to kind of wrap their head around what it is to critically reflect.
Right.
To the point that we've dug into this a bit, and we've found Chinese terms,
right,
which, because there's not really a literal translation, so we found in their language terms that we can use to help them understand, and then it all clicks for them, and it's really interesting to see them kind of light up because they don't usually have that kind of freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
It's totally different from what they experience. Yeah.
So that's really interesting to hear.
It is very interesting the way that they operate. I feel like there isn't much space for, what would you call it, for expressing yourself in Asian culture.
Right.
I think for them, everyone has a role, and your role is to contribute to the greater good of society. So they don't really focus much on the individual. So you don't really get to express your needs, your wants, or, if something is not right with you, they don't really have that space to share that. Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they don't have those thoughts, so it must be quite uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you've got the 2 papers under review, then you're working on the thesis. You must be pretty close to the end.
You would think so. Anyway, I mean, that's a logical thought, but I just had my my thesis proposal last week, and I thought I was close to the end, but after the review and after the feedback and the comments from all my committee members, I have a lot of work to do. They had so many things to say and so many things to contribute and things that they think I should correct or adjust in the model. So I feel like I'm going back to square one. So I have a lot of things to figure out in how to improve my model before I can go and collect data.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to do further research then for the thesis.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Wow. It's a lot of work. This is because I did a thesis, they would call it a thesis by compilation, and there were 4 journal articles, but they all went into the thesis and became chapters.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay,
so
okay.
It was all one big research project. So yeah, you're doing a lot of work. But it's like if it's a workaholic culture, then it kind of makes sense.
Right. So I have a lot of work to do, but I mean, it is the really the last lap, basically. Yeah.
So you're feeling good about things?
I am. I mean, considering everything, yeah. I'm feeling pretty good.
Have you been able to do any teaching while you've been studying?
I've taught. My professor did give me the opportunity to teach for one semester, one of her classes. So that was pretty good. Even though teaching a Taiwanese classroom is very different from anything that I've experienced, because prior to coming to Taiwan, I was an adjunct lecturer at my university, the University of the West Indies. And so I have some experience in teaching cognitive psychology, abnormal psychology. But teaching in a Taiwanese classroom is different because their participation is different. And I don't know if it's because they're afraid of speaking English or they're just shy, but the classroom participation isn't, what I would be used to. They're a little bit more reserved, so you have to pull on them or find more activities to get them to speak up and participate in class.
Yeah. If they're not encouraged to do that, that can be tough, I imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but overall, it was a good experience because it did, force me to be a little bit more interactive in my teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, nice one. And so you spoke before about wanting to be a pracademic.
Right.
So that would be, you have a little bit of teaching experience. Obviously, you've got the research experience. What do you see your career looking like then?
What do I see my career looking like? That's a good question, because I'm trying to figure it out, because there's really no roadmap on how to be a pracademic. Because the traditional role in academia is to just be a full-time academic, which is a little bit more straightforward. There's a path to doing that. You get hired by a university. You can either do just straight research, but most of the time it also includes some teaching. But a pracademic, I think it's up to you to really find your industry connection. So, and I don't have that right now. So I'm just gonna have to figure it out as it comes along.
Yeah.
So how do I get that industry connection? Possibly just going out and starting my own consultant business, and try to get that first client, and then it just spirals from there. And also, I would like to work at a university. I'm not sure if part-time or full-time yet. It just depends on how flexible my university will be in allowing me to be a consultant as well. So all of those things into consideration. I want to be an academic. I want to do some research, and I want to be able to work as a consultant as well. What kind of consultant? I'm open to most things, as long as it involves, me doing some research or doing workshops or things like that, whether it's restructuring organizations. I'd be open to doing any of those things.
Yeah.
And I'm open to doing any of those things in anywhere in the world as well.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah, is where do you see yourself doing it? You have a preference?
I would like to end up somewhere in Europe or Australia, actually. I like the East. So I want to stay in this region. But definitely it has to be somewhere where I can speak English, or if English is not the first language, I can get some translator or something. But please. Yes.
It's hard as a consultant, I reckon, to make a go of it, because even if you're quite proficient, you may not be 100% proficient in locals. I think sometimes don't always respond to that the best, or it might make you seem less expert.
Yeah,
these kind of things.
if you're in some, but that's the thing. If you're a consultant or something like that, if you go into a different space, you have to work with the locals.
Yeah.
You have to get their input.
Yeah.
That has to be the first step. Because I hear stories about that all the time, where big companies come in and they're doing some restructuring or whatever, but you have to speak to the people who are there to figure out exactly what is the problem and how to solve that problem. You can't just go in and think you know everything.
Yeah, that's right. This happens a lot in my field, in this area called sport for development, which is using sport as a tool for non-sporting outcomes, so cultural change or leadership development, this kind of thing. And a lot of times this will be Western researchers from Australia, the UK, US, Europe, parachuting into disadvantaged areas with their program. We're going to come in and we're going to teach soccer and develop leadership skills and teach about proper diet and exercise and this kind of thing. But there's not one-size-fits-all solutions to these. If you don't understand the situation if you don't even understand what problem you're trying to solve, it's not going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure. That's a problem that I see a lot of these companies make. They want to make an impact. They want to help, but they go about it in a really inefficient way. Yeah.
So clearly you have a passion for learning. How has this unfolded in your work so far?
I'd say that being in Taiwan, I've had to learn and relearn a lot of things. Okay, so a PhD, in and of itself is not easy. Even though it might look glamorous because you get to go to conferences and you get to travel and all of those things. But it's hard work, and I've had to learn a lot, like in such a short time, especially because I'm from a totally different field. So I'm from psychology and I'm transitioning into HR. So I came in not knowing a lot about HR.
Yep.
And so, I just had to learn as much as possible in a short time. And then on top of that, I'm also not I'm not a professional or anything in statistics. Actually, I hate statistics.
Oh no.
That's like my least favorite subject. But being a PhD student, you have to do a lot of research. So I've really had to put in a lot of work to buffer my research skills. And my professor, God bless her, I love you. God bless her. She has really put in a lot of work to get me to where I need to be. And I mean, I'm still not 100% there, but I've improved a whole lot. I've learned so much. Learning the M plus and R and all of those things. And I just, like, there are times where you're like, oh my God, why am I doing this? Why are you here? And there are times where you don't know, you feel like you should know something, but you don't know it. And so there are times where you feel dumb. You might ask a stupid question, but that's what learning is about.
Yeah.
And you have to, and I'm very fortunate to have a professor that provides the space for me to do that, to ask those silly questions, and she, even when she's overwhelmed, she never makes me feel like, I'm stupid or something. She does provide that space for me to learn. So I'm really grateful to have that support.
Yeah. Not everybody does have that.
I know. Not everybody has that support. And that makes or breaks your PhD career. It really does. Having a horrible supervisor can really drain you and really discourage you. So, and I'm very happy that I do not have that experience. Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget PhD students, that second word, you're still a student.
Right.
You're here to learn. You don't, if you knew everything, you would already have the PhD. So, you still have to learn the methods, the software, the analysis. That's actually what you're there to do.
Exactly.
It's almost like an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
In that way. Yeah. So if you have a good teacher, a good mentor.
Yeah, it's really important. It's really important. I mean, as I said, a lot of people looking on from the outside, it would look easy, but there's so much literature that talks about how university students are depressed or suffer from anxiety or some sort of mental illness, and it's because it's so stressful.
Yeah,
it can be so overwhelming, and you really have to figure yourself out. You're figuring out yourself. You're figuring out how to become this expert in your field of interest. Yeah. So it can be a really, really shaking experience, like shaking as in you're questioning yourself. You're wondering, why are you doing this? You're wondering if it's even worth it. Why did I leave my family and come to this place? Like so many things happen. It's so stressful. You have illnesses, so many things. And then you don't have the support. So having a really supportive supervisor can really make a huge difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Like you said, you're trying to learn another language,
right,
and you have to be proficient in it. And
right.
That's part of your degree, which is wild. You're upskilling yourself in terms of teaching in different ways, finding new ways to reach your students. You're learning a whole other field, HR, which may even be more complicated than learning Chinese, honestly. not to badmouth HR, but it's a complicated field. It's a lot. Yeah. And that's before you even get into self-care, right, taking care of yourself, and right, which still takes time and needs, you have to do it or else all the other stuff falls over.
Right. Yeah. So true.
So when you look to the future, what's on the horizon for you?
That's a good question. When you ask me about my future, like, my mind just shuts down. I object. I don't know. What is on the horizon for Candice Wray? I'd have to say just finishing up my PhD. I'm on the last lap, and so you kind of feel like you want to slow down because you're like, oh my gosh, it's like running a marathon and you're finally reaching the finish line, and then you feel like you're going to collapse or something, like you can't make it. But I just want to be able to push through these last few steps and finish up, and then after that hopefully find a great job somewhere so I can finally settle down and hopefully find a husband. Yeah.
There you go. Any ambitions to start a family? Or
I would love to start a family. Yeah. I mean, if God's willing, I hope that I will be able to start a family, and just work on balancing my professional and personal life. Yeah, because when you're doing a PhD, you actually don't have a lot of time for your personal life.
That's right.
And you lose a lot of friends because you don't have time to go out all the time or stay in touch as often. So that actually does affect your social circle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
To say nothing of how becoming an academic makes you a little weird. And your friends don't know who you are anymore. Those are some big words she's using all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all very exciting, and you're going to work on your pracademic side of things as well. And it sounds like just the way that you've balanced all these different things through your studies, you're going to be well set up to tackle that.
I definitely hope so. I would love to do some work back in my country, which is Jamaica. So I would love to be able to partner with some local businesses to, in the role of a consultant to help them to, restructure or optimize their work performance. Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be interesting. That's something that I would like, that I'm looking forward to. Yeah.
See your family again for at least a little bit. And
Right. It's always good to go home.
Yeah.
Even though like half of my childhood friends don't live in Jamaica anymore because, people migrate.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always nice to go back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's always, you can leave where you're from, but it never leaves you.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, or at least that's been my experience.
Yeah.
Well, the last question that I ask everybody is, what is something in your life not related to your PhD or your work that you're excited about?
Not related to my PhD. Okay, I'm sorry. The opposite thing came to my mind.
That's how in it you are right now.
Wait, I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to say first, one of the things that I'm most excited about is going to AOM next year. AOM will be in Copenhagen next year.
Oh.
So I've never been to Europe, so I'm really excited of the opportunity to go to Copenhagen.
Yeah,
so
nice.
I'm really excited about that.
That's a great destination, for sure.
It looks like it for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
And something non-work related that I'm interested or looking forward to, when I think about it, what I'm looking forward to is actually just being able to complete this program and to see what comes next. Because, even though I'm scared because there's so much anxiety, because I don't know what will happen or where I will end up, I'm excited. I'm excited to see, which place I'm going to call my home. Because I've been away from my country for so long that it kind of sort of doesn't feel like home anymore, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I'm in Taiwan, but I don't necessarily think that I would live there long term. So then I know that something else is out there for me, but I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
So that unknown is kind of exciting, and I'm looking forward to it because I know that no matter what, there's only good things in store. I mean, girl, you got a PhD.
That's right. That's right. And maybe you'll go to Copenhagen and you'll get a taste of the European life, and maybe you'll want to be there or France or somewhere else. Who knows?
Sure. So I'm excited about the unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like when you started the PhD, you didn't know where it was going to take you.
Exactly. Yeah, and I came to somewhere that I had no idea about.
Yeah.
And it was a good decision.
Yeah. I think that's, if you bet on yourself.
Right.
I think it often pays off.
It definitely does, for sure.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time and sitting down with me. It's been really great to meet you. This is actually one of the first times that this was my ambition with the podcast. I wanted to meet new people in unfamiliar places. This is my first ANSM conference. And so it's been very exciting for me to hear your story. And I'll be watching with interest to see, because we've got each other on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
I'll see where you go from here. And it'll be really fascinating to watch.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was a pleasure.